What's up, y'all? It's Dagwood here. So we're doing a chapter. We're reading the importance of being earnest, the life of actor Jim Varney, and today I'm going to be reading chapter 10. So this is part 5. I've been reading on it for a little bit. Um, I'll just be reading chapter 10. But I did want to say this. So I'm on Twitter, and I'm not giving a plug to go check that out or whatever. But Justin Lloyd, the guy that wrote this book, Jim Varney's nephew, gave me a follow on Twitter. I thought that was pretty cool. So I don't, Justin, if I doubt you're wanting to watch this video, but if you happen to do it, hi, that's cool as hell. Anyway, let me butcher your book. All right, so we're on chapter 10, and it's called "Striking It Rich in California." By February 1976, Jim was feeling the time was right for Los Angeles. Lyles planned to go with him. Thanks to the perseverance of Ruth and Hutchins, Cash had given them the phone number and address of his West Coast agent, Marty Klein. Cash had asked Klein to help Jim out. A few weeks after they found an apartment and settled in, Lyles read in the Hollywood Reporter that Cash was going to be in town to accept his star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame that day at noon. As Lyles recalls, I woke Jim up, showed him the article, and we both scrambled to make ourselves presentable. We got there as the ceremony was already underway. After Johnny uncovered his star and was kneeling beside it posing for photos, I pushed Jim in close where he could talk to John to be seen. Cash was really happy to see him, as Jim said something right off that made Cash laugh. He told us to go behind the VIP site and wait for him. He joined us a few minutes later and invited Jim to come over to the Merv Griffin show that night and hang out. Jim's first opportunity to perform stand-up in Los Angeles was at the new legendary Comedy Store. Alongside future giants such as Robin Williams and David Letterman, Jim found a new audience for his material while gaining needed exposure. Lyles remembers Jim teaching Williams to speak in Bulls Russian, that he had learned from his cousin Ed McCord, who had majored in Russian language and literature in college. Oh, maybe it's bullshit, but club owner Mitzi Shore, I probably shouldn't have said that. Club owner Mitzi Shore liked Jim's act and helped him get bookings on the Strip. Jim was soon performing at the Improv in Hollywood, the Horn in Santa Monica, and the Laugh Stop in Santa Ana. Jim appreciated the opportunities Shore gave him, as well as the use of her black limo, which had a television in the back, a real luxury at the time. He and fellow comic Skip Stevenson sometimes traveled together while performing in the area. He and I played those clubs for 4 days a week and a couple of $100, Jim recalled. Jim later talked of his experiences doing stand-up and the brutal nature of perfecting a routine. "You die alone up there," he once said when describing the reality of bombing. Along with helping Jim find work, Lyles assisted him in maneuvering his old car around the enormously steep roads of the Hollywood Hills. They had nicknamed Jim's 1960 Dodge Dart Pioneer the Shark because of his front-end appearance, with a seemingly endless row of vertical lines on its massive grille. It reminded them of the shark from the movie Jaws. Released the previous summer. Without a parking brake or gear, They had to place a brick underneath one of the wheels to keep the car from rolling away. I've been there. Despite some close calls, the car survived and even made a couple more trips back to Tennessee and Kentucky. Jim's dad was surprised it had ever made it out of Lexington. Lyles woke up one morning in late March to find a note on their apartment door. It was from Ruth. He was in Nashville. He had gotten their address from Jim's mother, called around Los Angeles, and found someone to drop a note by their apartment. Remember, this is before cell phones and email. As if Los Angeles wasn't competitive enough, Jim and Lyles were initially operating without a telephone. But they scraped up enough money to place a long-distance call back to Ruth. He told them about a summer TV series that Cash was planning. Cash apparently wanted Jim to be a part of it. They were invited to come up to San Francisco where Cash was performing and attended a meeting with Cash's wife, June Carter, and some of his show's producers, all at Cash's expense. Lyles and Jim flew up for a couple of days for an informal audition. It was Jim's first time meeting Carter, whose input for the show was as important as her husband's. Carter, of course, was a celebrity in her own right as a member of the famous singing Carter family. She was also known for her comedy on stage and during performances. Jim performed some of his routine so Carter could see what Cash had been raving about. Still, Cash's recommendation was not a slam dunk. Carter was actually interested in having one of the funnier members of the Oak Ridge Boys write comedy for the show. Lyles says that after the meeting, they were expecting an offer, but months went by and they heard nothing. Lyles says, "I finally got William Morris in New York to look into it. And Joe Cates, executive producer, was not interested, based on other comedians John and June had suggested. William Morris twisted Cates' arm, showed him videos of Jim's commercials, and Cates agreed to hire him sight unseen. It was what Cash wanted, and the endorsement of William Morris closed it. The show Johnny Cash and Friends was a summer replacement series scheduled to run for 4 weeks. The variety show wave that had gained popularity in the 60s was still going strong in the 70s. The wave included Johnny's original ABC show, The Johnny Cash Show, which aired 1969 to 1971. In the second go-round for Cash, CBS was trying to ride the momentum. Tapings took place inside the Opera House back in Nashville in front of capacity crowds. Oh, we got people. Hey, hi. Said hi. 3 people said the same thing. Hi. I will say hi. I'll try to look up a little bit more than I usually do. Normally nobody's here, so I just read the book. But I will say hello when asked to do so. All right. Let me wet my whistle. Y'all have anything else to say other than hi? I mean, do y'all like Jim Varney? Oh, well, that's fair enough. I appreciate that. Well, listen to the story then. Jim got to share the stage not only with Cash and Carter, but with rising young comedian Steve Martin. It was right before Martin hit it big on Saturday Night Live. Lyles remembers Martin and Jim getting along well, although he says Martin didn't respond to Jim's jokes at first. It wasn't until Martin and a group of people associated with the show saw Jim perform at the Exit Inn that Martin witnessed more of Jim's arsenal of voices and characters. Lyles recalls Martin was blown away when Cletus J. Hoker, a wino character of Jim's, broke into his impressions of Peter O'Toole, Richard Burton, and lastly Dylan Thomas. Martin made a point of telling Jim how much he enjoyed the Dylan Thomas impression. It turned out that both he and Jim had grown up listening to the same Dylan Thomas record. Jim told Martin that he was the first person in a long time to recognize who the impression was about. From that point on, Martin had a newfound respect for Jim, and their friendship grew from there. When Jim and Lyles came back to Los Angeles, Martin invited them to catch his performance at the Troubadour Club. They all enjoyed catching up after the set. Things were finally moving for Jim. Before the Johnny Cash show even aired, Jim made his first national television appearance on the Merv Griffin Show in May 1976. Jim's new agent at William Morris handled the booking. Griffin was impressed with Jim and invited him back. Even though the 4-episode Johnny Cash and Friends was a short run, Jim received positive reviews. Marshall Falwell Jr. wrote about the show for Photo Play magazine. In mentioning Jim's performance and the talk about the possibility of a TV show in the future featuring him, he wrote, "You will definitely be hearing from Jim Varney again." Now that Jim was in California, he was catching up with old friends who had also moved there. One was comedian buddy Freddie Prinze. Oh yeah, I remember seeing him back in the other chapters. He had been trying to get in touch with Jim ever since they had performed together in New York. Jim had not given him any contact information other than that he was from Kentucky. On at least one occasion, when Prinze was doing a radio appearance in Chicago, he called out to Jim while on the air, figuring the signal might well reach Kentucky, to please get in touch if he could hear him. Unfortunately, Jim's reunion with Prinze was their last contact before Prinze's suicide in 1977. Oh, that's a shame. I didn't see that coming. Jim was soon making the rounds with his stand-up on a variety of TV shows. One was Dinah Shore's like dinosaurs. But Dinah Shore's, that's the name. Dinah Shore's show. Johnny Carson band leader Doc Severinsen was another guest scheduled to appear the same day. Severinsen went on before Jim and shared a personal story about his battle with alcohol. As Jim watched from backstage, he realized that he needed to make a drastic change to the material he had planned to use. He was prepared to do his Cletus J. Hoker routine, the wino who cooked with wine. Jim realized how insensitive he would appear, and with Joe Lyles' help, quickly explained the problem to the producers. The producers understood and supported him, even though they knew the new material wasn't going to be as strong or polished. I'll always have a special respect for him for doing that in that moment, says Lyles. Severinsen and his manager later learned what had happened and were appreciative of Jim's sensitivity. On October 19th, 1976, Jim got a chance to display his talent on what comedians considered the ultimate television venue, The Tonight Show starring Johnny Carson. One of the show's scouts had seen Jim perform at the Comedy Store. Although the Carson people wanted Jim on the show, they didn't think that he was strong enough to appear when Carson was hosting. They scheduled Jim to be on when actor McLean Stevenson, famous for the TV series MASH, was guest hosting. While it was a pivotal opportunity, it prevented Jim from the possibility of obtaining the ultimate validation for a comic at the time, Johnny waving him over for a quick chat after the act. Doing so would instantly put the performer on the radar of the most powerful network executives and Hollywood casting agents. That was, it's before my time, but I do recall hearing that a bunch from a lot of folks that, that are in the comedy world. Actor Jack Palance, I know that guy, was one of the guests scheduled to appear on Carson that night Jim was performing. Jim had just finished getting his makeup done when Jack Palance walked into the room. Jim said to Lyles in a cowboy drawl, "Joseph Perry, that's the man who shot Shane," referring to Palance's Oscar-nominated gunfighter role in the movie Shane. Yep, I know that one. The makeup people thought it was funny, but Palance was visibly upset. Perhaps he had grown tired of being so closely associated with that role. Or perhaps it was just the fact that a relatively unknown talent had assumed he could joke around so openly with an established actor before being properly introduced. I bet it was that one. Whatever the reason, an awkward hush filled the room. Palance did not speak to Jim or acknowledge him afterward. Jim apologized, telling Palance how much he had loved him in the movie, but the damage was done. Robert Blake, then the popular star of the hit detective show Beretta, was hanging out backstage and recognized Jim from Merv Griffin's show. Jim was shaken up after what had happened in the makeup room. Blake assured him everything would be fine, and when Jim's name was called to go on, Blake placed his hand on Jim's back, pushed him toward the stage, and hollered, "Go get him!" Jim's performance was well received, but not spectacular enough to provide any real boost to his career. Because of this, he still took advantage of any television opportunity wherever it happened to be. As he did with Johnny Cash and Friends, Jim traveled to Tennessee in August 1976 to perform on 2 episodes of the short-lived Music Hall America, taped in Opryland. The syndicated 1-hour variety show featured comedy and music acts and with rotating guest hosts. Jim was also continuing work on his Sergeant Glory character for the Cardin and Cherry. Around November 1976, the agency flew him to Florida to shoot a commercial for a dairy. Jim had a scary experience at his hotel. He returned to his room exhausted from work, plopped down on his bed, and drifted right to sleep. Someone broke in and stole the Rolex right off his wrist. Whoa. Then they cut the pocket open in the blue jeans he was wearing and took his wallet. Damn. Sister Jake remembers Jim showing his mother the shirt he had been wearing, which had also been cut with a knife. Needless to say, it's fortunate Jim didn't wake up during the robbery. He must have had a few drinks in him, I imagine. Despite the fact that Cardin and Cherry had sold Sergeant Glory to a few clients along with Purity, the character had finally run its course. John Cherry later admitted that he was still too inexperienced at the time to successfully parlay the character's success into additional markets. One thing he did know for sure was that Jim had talent. He later recalled Jim had that something even then. On one of Jim's visits home to Lexington, he reunited with an old flame, Jackie Drew. He had found out from his sisters that she had recently divorced and was raising twin sons. He had developed a crush on Jackie in high school, and they had acted alongside each other in school plays. Jackie was tall and slender with long brown hair. One reporter interviewed her and Jim in 1982. Wrote that she could pass for a model. She and Jim began dating on June 15, 1977, Jim's 28th birthday. They married in California, and was also around this time that Jackie changed the spelling of her first name to Jackie, and sometimes used Jackie. It's just different spellings. Jim now had the added responsibility of supporting a family while looking for his next big break. Fortunately, Jim continued to find TV work. In the fall of 1977, Jim's Virgil Sims character began a recurring role on the Martin Mull and Fred Willard mock TV show Fernwood Tonight. Fernwood was a spin-off from the TV show Mary Hartman, and was produced by Norman Lear, All in the Family, Sanford and Son, One Day at a Time, etc., and Alan Thicke. Mole played the hilariously glib host Barth Gimble, the twin brother of Garth Gimble. What? Barth Gimble and Garth Gimble, whom he had played on Mary Hartman Willard, was his foolish sidekick, Jerry Hubbard. Lord, that was a bunch of tongue twisters, I feel like. I don't even know what was going on. Again, this is before my time. The show had the production values of local programming seen across much of the country, with its small stage and minimal set. Many guests were quirky characters from Middle America who provided easy targets for the show's host. Virgil Sims was a perfect fit. Lyles recalls the Virgil Sims character being created by Jim a couple of years earlier in Nashville. Virgil was originally conceived as a mechanic who worked at a gas station in the South. An early bit consisted of Virgil performing an oil change in exchange for a hit of acid from the car's hippie owner. That would be a funny skit. The strength of the bit rested on Jim's ability to describe some of the crazy things he did in the garage while hallucinating. I believe I put some Austin Healey brake shoes on a Cadillac, recalled the mechanic in one of Jim's stand-up routines at the Exit Inn. Many of the same elements of the mechanic on acid were used in one of his early performances in Fernwood. The character's unconventional qualities expanded even more when the talented Fernwood writers provided their input. Virgil's appearance consisted of polyester leisure suits that ranged in color from canary yellow to lime green. His greased-up, slick-backed hair and white shoes complemented his southern charm. Virgil also entertained with stories about moonlighting as an instructor at a community college, teaching a variety of oddball courses in one episode. Virgil describes a new course he is teaching that offers truck drivers helpful advice and cooking tips when on the road. He explains to Barth just how inspiring a love song is to a lonely truck driver. In a follow-up appearance, Jim sings a tune called Redneck Heaven and shows off his knee-slapping ham-bone skills when belting out lyrics that reference moon pies and R.C. Cola. Let me wet my whistle on that note. Virgil, who idolized motorcycle daredevil Evel Knievel, was known as the Mobile Home Daredevil. During one episode, in a twist on Knievel's famous jumps, Virgil explains to Barth Gimble how he jumped over a row of motorcycles while driving a fully equipped Winnebago. Now that's a hell of a stunt. The opportunity for Jim to use one of his own characters in an improv setting was a refreshing change. Playing off the talents of people like Mull and Willard gave Jim's performances that much more of an impact. He made 4 appearances as Virgil on the Fernwood during its first year. Here he appeared in 3 more episodes of the following season. By then, the show's name had changed to America Tonight, for its location had changed from fictitious Fernwood, Ohio, to real-life Altacoma, California. Jim also landed a part on an NBC pilot called Riding High, based on the 1975 movie Hearts of the West, starring Jeff Bridges. Riding High followed the exploits of a writer of Western novels hoping to live out his cowboy dreams. Although the pilot had been written by the noted Larry Gelbart of MASH, it was not picked up by the network. Jim's agent at William Morris soon found Jim an opportunity on another pilot that did get picked up by ABC. Operation Petticoat was a comedy starring John Astin, Richard Gillian, and based on the 1959 Cary Grant movie of the same name. The show follows the continuing adventures of a pink submarine, the color of a result of having to mix what little red and white primer was available during hasty repairs during World War II, and its oddball crew, which includes a small group of attractive female nurses. Jim plays Seaman Broom, also referred to as Doom and Gloom. Broom because of his habit of delivering troubling news. Jim's southern accent helped him give a convincing portrayal of the West Virginia crewman. Jim's parents watched faithfully and came to the unbiased conclusion that Jim was the best one on the show. During one episode, they watched Jim's character get dumped into the Pacific Ocean. Louise was concerned, knowing Jim's inability to swim. Coincidentally, Jim called while they were watching. Jim assured Louise he had never been in harm's way. Someone had coached him through enough of the basics to keep him afloat. In the summer of 1978, ABC decided the large cast of Petticoat was too big to allow the show to be as funny as they had intended. They hired new producers and fired every cast member except Jim. Richard Bristoff and Melinda Nod, except Jim, Richard Bristoff and Melinda Nod. The changes proved ineffective, and the low ratings prevented the show from completing a second season. Lyles visited Jim on the set at one of the last filmings of Petticoat for an important talk. Lyles told Jim that he wanted Jim to look around and remember when and where he was when he heard that Lyles was about to say. Lyles then told him that when the show was over, Jim should be prepared for at least 6 months to a year before anything of substance would happen career-wise. Lyles assured him that he would be working hard, but it was a matter of getting the machine back up and running. Finding a worthy project or creating one. Jim said he understood. One of the hottest shows on TV at the time was the comedy Alice. Like Petticoat, it had been adapted from a popular movie. The show centers on a waitress named Alice, a recently widowed mother from New Jersey who had moved to Phoenix, Arizona with her son looking to advance her singing career. Much of the show takes place at Mel's Diner, where Alice works alongside outspoken man crazy Flo, naive and anxious Vera, and grumpy owner Cook Mel. In the fall of 1978, during the show's third season, Jim landed a guest starring role as Flo's boyfriend, Milo Skinner. The episode Better Never Than Late culminates with Flo and Milo foiling a robbery at the diner after Milo pulls a gun on the robber. It wasn't exactly James Bond, but Jim still got the girl and saved the day. Jim continued performing stand-up while increasing his exposure through TV appearances, including return spots on The Merv Griffin Show. Lyles remembers Jim's last appearance on Griffin in the summer of 1979. Jim did a stand-up bit and sang Terrible Tawana, a song Jackie wrote. The joke was that it was from a musical about a great white hunter in Africa. On the panel, he entertained Merv and British actor Michael York with various voices, impressions, and dialects. He did several different British dialects, identifying them by the city. York sat back quite impressed, shook his head, smiled, and said, "Uncanny." Along with an appearance on actor and singer Susan Anton's short-lived Presenting Susan Anton show, Jim appeared on comedian Norm Crosby's The Comedy Shop. Actress Zsa Zsa Gabor was a special guest on the night Jim performed. Crosby asked Gabor to introduce Jim. The V in Varney gave Gabor trouble because of her Hungarian accent, But Crosby repeated Jim's name to allow everyone to clearly understand they were about to see a rising new talent. During his routine, Jim portrayed Cletus J. Hawker, the wino who hosted a show called Cooking with Wine. Its entire premise was based on the fact that Cletus did not cook with wine, just under the influence of it. To add to the absurdity, that is funny. That is a funny joke. To add to the absurdity, Cletus suggested unconventional items as cooking aids, such as using a wine bottle as a rolling pin. Lyles recalls how the character came about. Here, let me hit this. Cletus J. Hawker was born in the car, driving in the Mojave Desert one night when we were on our way back to Nashville from Los Angeles to do the Cash Summer Series. Jim was in the passenger seat and started talking like a drunk and knocking around some lines about this guy hanging out near a dumpster and what he had found there. Soon it turned into a routine where this wino had a cooking with wine show. I threw out the name Cletus J. Hawker because I had seen it in a store window near South Mill Street in Lexington, Kentucky. Anyway, this guy had a sign in the window advertising his watch repair business, and that was his name. Jim agreed it was funny and started using it. Jim also landed an appearance on actor and comedian Alan King's one-hour special, Alan King's Third Annual Final Warning. It was King's third edition of Tips on How to Survive the 70s. Also on the show were TV stars such as Gavin MacLeod of Love Boat and Hal Linden of Barney Miller. Yet despite the television exposure and the company he was in, success in landing in a permanent role on a network series continued to elude Jim. Even though Lyles had clearly warned him of a potential slowdown, Jim had a hard time dealing with it. He started drinking more, buying half pints of whiskey that he referred to as sipping whiskeys. He was depressed, and the booze made his behavior obnoxious at times. As understanding as Lyles was, he was tiring of Jim's conduct while still doing everything he could to advance his career. Lyles decided to create a show for Jim that could be pitched to the networks, called Jim Varney's Family Album. Oh, well, I know that made it, because I've seen it. It was a 30-minute variety show that revolved around many of Jim's comedic characters. It was to be reminiscent of Sid Caesar and Imogene Coca, Your Show of Shows, and the work of comedians like Monty Python and Ernie Kovacs. Lyles went to Neiman Marcus and purchased a fancy leather-bound album with gold lettering and filled it with pictures of established characters of Jim's, such as Virgil Sims and Cletus J. Hawker, among others. The proposal said the show would be devoid of named guests, known songs, lavish sets, beautiful costumes, breathtaking dance numbers, and other redeeming social values. Each show will contain only original material and songs, unless they can be stolen from public domain. Nothing on the show should be construed as art. The entire thing was Lyles' project, from concept to writing. It got attention at William Morris because it resembled a mini pilot. It gave them something to show producers and network executives in order to get a dialogue started. Well, I mean, I didn't see this pilot version of it, but I mean, he did go along to make something called that. Meanwhile, in the summer of 1979, Lyles was able to get Jim onto a comedy special airing on Showtime. Jim traveled to Houston to participate in the big laugh-off at the new club called Rockefeller's. Laugh-Off was a stand-up comedian contest that pitted Jim against other talented young comics such as Ollie Joe Prater and Argus Hamilton. And in describing Jim's act, Gregory Curtis of Texas Monthly called it an accomplishment accomplished by a slightly wearisome series of stories in a Kentucky hillbilly accent. Jim managed a second-place finish that included a cash prize. At the time, he needed the money just as much as the exposure. On June 14th, 1979, Jim began a 2-week engagement opening for Mel Tillis at the Nugget outside Reno. Comedian Lonnie Shore had recommended Jim to Tillis after working with Jim previously and been impressed with his act. Lyles accompanied Jim and Jackie while staying in touch with William Morris on the progress of the variety show project. Jim's act was getting a warm reception, and he was hitting it off with Tillis. Then Lyles received word from William Morris that a Fox TV executive was interested in a family album and wanted to see Jim perform on a showcase, a small production that exposes actors to talent agents, producers, and directors. Lyles informed Jim of the good news and helped him prepare for the showcase, scheduled to take place when they returned to Los Angeles. A week or two before the showcase, Jim and Jackie went to a party one Sunday night. The next day, they excitedly told Lyles about an interesting couple they had met. They were looking forward to seeing them soon again. No names were mentioned, just that the couple had been down to earth. When Jim finally performed the showcase for the Fox TV executive, he was surprised to see the executive was the husband of the couple he and Jackie had met weeks before. Although Lyles had told Jim the executive's full name repeatedly when discussing the show's status, Jim hadn't put it together when he had met him at the party. The Fox executive passed on the show. Of course. It's unclear how the sequence of events might have played a part, whether the executive was offended that Jim didn't know who he was from the start, or the like. The episode was the beginning of the end for Lyles and Jim's business relationship. Oh, that's a bummer. The mix-up, although minor to the scheme of things, encapsulated the difficulty Lyles had been experiencing for some time in working with Jim. Jim seemed to be more interested in waiting for the next big thing to come along than putting forth the sustained effort required to make something concrete happen. During the time Jim was in Reno opening for Mel Tillis, he and Jackie had been invited out to visit Tillis's home in Nashville. They decided to take him up on the offer and planned to go on to Lexington afterward to visit family and friends. Lyles stayed in Los Angeles. While Jim and Jackie were in Lexington, Lyles received a call from Jim early one morning. Jim told Lyles that he and Jackie had been talking it over and decided that they should take over managing Jim's career. A couple of times in the past, usually on weekends, when there was nothing to do but get in a stew or a funk, Jim had said to Lyles that he wanted to fire him, drop William Morris, and move back to Nashville. Lyles had always managed to quietly talk him off the ledge. This time, something clicked in Lyles' head. He realized this was an opportunity for both of them to move on. Then Jim paused to let his words sink in, which was usually the time where Lyles started trying to talk him back into the relationship. Lyles said instead that maybe that was a good idea, that Jim had a world-class agency behind him. He was now a familiar name in town, and maybe they could do a better job of putting things together. Jim was a little taken aback. Lyles said that he would give Jim all the information he needed to help make the transition as smooth as possible. Lyles even assured Jim that he would be around to answer any questions or give advice. Oh, I bet that shook him to the core. The more Lyles talked, the more he felt the burden being lifted from him. And Lyles wouldn't have to worry about being blamed if Jim failed, because it was Jim who was dumping him. After a surprise, Jim let it all soak in. He agreed, and they left it there. Lyles knew that Jim did not expect it to end that way, even though he had initiated it. Lyles confessed, "Once we broke off the business relationship, I was on the adrenaline high for 2 days. I was just glad and relieved to be out of that situation. Lyles always wished Jim well and helped him with situations over the years, but his assistance was limited to simple requests that never required extended involvement. Shortly after they parted, Jim's parents called Lyles to let him know that they did not have any hard feelings. That meant a great deal to Lyles after growing so close to the family over the years. Not much happened for Jim for several months. He continued to do stand-up, playing in clubs as far down the coast as San Diego. It allowed him to make enough money to get by for a while. The year before, Jim had told Lyles that he would always be grateful for Lyles pushing him to do stand-up and helping him develop an act. It was something that he could always fall back on, he told him. Jim's next opportunity culminated in what has become one of the most famous TV failures of that era, the curiously titled Pink Lady Show, aka Pink Lady and Jeff. Pink Lady was not an actual lady, but a female Japanese singing duo consisted of Mia Namoto and Kia Masada. Both 21. The attractive young pair had become a singing sensation in Japan. As they toured the world, their popularity grew. NBC President Fred Silverman noticed their success and decided to sign them to co-host a primetime variety show with stand-up comedian Jeff Altman in 1980. Little did Silverman and the producers know that the songs the girls sang in English were memorized phonetically. The truth was that they could barely hold a conversation in English, which made learning comedic timing impossible. Jim later joked about the difficulties of creating comedy with an interpreter. Even though the girls struggled with the language barrier, Jim was impressed with their work ethic. He said they never complained about their workload despite having to keep up their concert appearances across the Pacific. He said their makeup was always perfect and they never even seemed to break a sweat. According to head writer Mark Evanier, when Jim was being cast, there was initial hesitation about Jim's looks by some people involved. But producer Marty Krofft insisted on Jim as the additional male sketch player. The struggling show suffered from numerous guest stars dropping out at the last minute due to the show's increasingly low ratings and resulting script changes. But on at least one occasion that helped Jim, in one sketch, Buddy Ebsen was supposed to play Abe Lincoln. Jim filled in and was convincing as Lincoln being honored at a comedy roast. Despite featuring popular guest stars and high-profile musical acts, the show's premise and the dying variety show format proved too much to overcome. The show was canceled before the 6th episode aired. Jim was out of work once again. All right. Man, that was a fun chapter, to be honest with you. But we'll see you in... We'll be reading... We'll see you next week. But, I mean, we'll be reading more on this in 2 weeks. All right. Take care, y'all.